Over the last few days, the show Smiling Friends, a new animated show on Adult Swim, got greenlit for a second season. This is a show that came out earlier this year, and it was made by Michael Cusack and Zach Hadel, who are both online YouTube animators. And the show really blew up, and it's garnered a pretty solid fan base at this point, and a lot of people really seem to like it. But one thing you'll notice about this show, if you go through the comments on a lot of these videos, is that almost all of the top comments mention the show's creators by name as part of the comment. This isn't something that's normal with a lot of shows. If you go on Family Guy clips on YouTube, right, and you look at any of the comments on the popular clips, you'll notice that very few of them mention the show's creator, Seth MacFarlane, by name. He's one of the more popular creators, just in general, of animated shows. And even he doesn't seem to have the notoriety within his fan base that Michael Cusack and Zach Hadel have in Smiling Friends. And I think this is because these two guys they've kind of developed a parasocial relationship with a lot of their fans because they've been around for a long time, and particularly Zach, who goes by Psychic Pebbles, has been on several podcasts and other online shows just as himself. And what you'll notice about him is that he's a very outgoing guy, and he sort of has this non sequitur way of talking that is super unique and creative, and he seems to dominate every conversation he's in. And he's just a really funny guy in general, which is, that's saying a lot considering how many people online try to be funny constantly. This guy really kills it. But because of this, I think this leads to the show's biggest issue right now, outside of the show itself, which is that its fan base is just the kind of people who probably aren't willing to really criticize the show because they're so enamored with the show's creators. As such, there are some flaws with the show that I think are pretty glaring at this point, that it really, you can't find them mentioned really anywhere right now. So I thought I would kind of go through and talk about the things holding back Smiling Friends, things that hopefully get ironed out by season 2. So one of the things I've noticed with the show, probably it's my biggest critique of it so far, is that it just adheres way too much to played out comedy and, animated comedy tropes. For example, there's a mystery episode, and it's definitely the weakest episode of the season. And it's all about how the main characters, Charlie and Pim, go to a restaurant, and they see that the owner of the restaurant is dead. It's a fast food restaurant. And now they have to find out, okay, who of this wacky cast killed him? I think this mystery plot in animated shows is usually pretty good, but it's so common that there's not much you can do with it other than just going completely absurdist, like something like Aqua Teen Hunger Force might do. Because what's going to happen is at the end of the episode, either it's a giant misunderstanding and the person they thought was dead isn't really dead and the whole thing was just like absurd. Or B, he did die, but how he died was just an incredibly outlandish set of circumstances that don't have anything that, are beyond like logically plausible. And, that neither one of those is going to be particularly funny at this point. Smiling Friends goes for the latter. I don't think the payoff was as funny as it was probably as it was to the creators when they conceived of the joke. This kind of leads to maybe the toughest truth about how this show is written. And so I noticed this issue appears in a lot of episodes. And I think the problem with it is probably that some of the absurd and funny things that Psychic Pebbles, for instance, probably thinks of in his conversations, stuff that you see in his podcasts, probably don't come off as absurd when it comes to an animated show. as such, a lot of the joke is lost because it's supposed to be so out of left field. So there's a joke in one of the episodes where the main character, or Charlie, Psychic Pebble's character, sits down with this shrimp. And they've been spending the whole day trying to get the shrimp in shape and make him attractive so he could get his old girlfriend back. And Charlie kind of goes on this tangent about how, it's not your fault. There's nothing you can do about it. You're just a shrimp, man. Like, you're not going to get anybody because you're a shrimp. And I think that'd be pretty funny writing it. Like, I could see them sitting around thinking of a joke, and they said, like if they're like, well, how's this guy going to get his girlfriend back? And then, I don't know, one of them goes, well, he's just like a shrimp. So, like, what can he do? He's just a shrimp. And, like, that's funny because, like, you wrote the character to be a shrimp. But when in the show, there's a few flaws with that. One, he already did get a girlfriend, so it's not that funny. Like, it's not that absurd that a shrimp in this world would find a girlfriend. And then two, the guy saying it is this, like, yellow thing. And like, he doesn't really have any grounds to stand on. Like, what is described as attractive in this show? That hasn't been established. So if the joke was like, that Charlie, the yellow guy, said, I mean, how's he going to get a girlfriend? He's a shrimp. And they're like, well, you're just a yellow guy. And they're like, well, he's a shrimp. Like I feel like that would make a little bit more sense. But the way it was delivered, like, that joke doesn't really land super well. And then this kind of goes into, another example of this is there's a scene where, I heard them talking about this on a podcast that they were particularly proud of this joke. I just didn't think the joke worked super well. So it's the beginning of the episode, and Charlie and Pim are sitting around talking about, they're just like kind of shooting the shit. And Charlie's on his phone, and he sees that someone called the Renaissance Men are coming into town. And Charlie says, oh, looks like the Renaissance Men are coming into town. And then Pim says, who are the Renaissance Men? And Charlie's like, I don't know, but they're coming into town. And then Pim follows up by saying, well, who are they? Like, who are they, Charlie? And Charlie's like, I don't know, man. I'm just telling you what I'm reading here. I feel like there's a few exchanges like this in the show, and I don't think the joke is really there. And I think the problem with it is who's the straight man? So is it Charlie? Because Pim is asking him to tell him all the information about a topic that he's just learning about, and he told him this. Like, that expectation, that's a social expectation we have, that if you're telling something about someone about something, that you should be like some sort of an expert on it, and you should have all these answers. That's like kind of absurd social expectation we have, but we still do it. And it's like, okay, well, is that the joke? And it's like, well, probably not, because Charlie isn't, like, Charlie was willing to talk about these guys. So you wouldn't really say, like, firecrackers are coming into town. Who are the firecrackers? I don't know. Like, that'd be a little absurd. Yeah, the expectation that you should know more about that is valid. So then is it the other way? Is Pim the one who's the straight man? It's like, well, no, not really, because Charlie already told him he didn't know who these guys were. So, like, Pim isn't pointing out that Charlie's being absurd for saying this. Both of them are, like, acting sort of irrationally in this conversation. And I'm not sure if that's, like, because this is apparently based on a real conversation. And I'm like, well, I don't know. Maybe they should have had a little bit more self-awareness in how they thought of the joke, because I just don't think it works super well. So again, I'm going to bring it back to Family Guy, which isn't the best show, but I think they do these conversations better than anyone else, I think, where it's these casual conversations pointing out, like, social flaws that we seem to just have accepted. There's this joke where Joe and Quagmire are talking, and Joe says something like, here's a tip, Quagmire, don't get married. And then Quagmire says, I wasn't planning on it. And he's like, good, don't. And he's like, I wasn't. Good, don't. And it's funny because, like, that is something people say. People will give you advice on things that there was no indication you would need. But And if someone were to actually call it out, like Quagmire did in that situation, it's like, well, would that kind of person double down? And in Joe's case, they did. And now this like casual comment's getting really aggressive. I think that works way better because Quagmire is the straight man, and Joe's the one being absurd. And what makes the joke work is that that is a 100% real absurd thing that people do in the day-to-day life. It's just something we've come to accept. So I don't think Smiling Friends is there yet with that kind of humor. And I think I already said this, but yeah, like the I feel like the sort of brutal truth right now is that Zach, what makes him so funny in casual conversations is that he is saying truly absurd things. And I think this is the truth for a lot of people, a lot of artists, is they're not fully aware of what makes them entertaining. They are aware that they are entertaining and they know how to be entertaining, or else they wouldn't consistently do this. They know, how to make certain circumstances funny. They just don't know how to set up those circumstances. That's like a whole other thing you need to learn and overcome. And it's a lot to ask anyone to figure it out, but people can. Anyways, I think the writers, it's not like this video was super necessary. I think they're more than capable of figuring out how to overcome these flaws they have right now. And they just will. There's the type of reasoning that these guys have is like just on par, like very on point. Like the show itself is very clever. The only other thing I was going to point out that, you don't necessarily, it doesn't need to go in this direction. I really want them to play around with the show's main premise, which I don't think they have yet, which, if you've noticed, I haven't pointed it out, which the main premise of the show is that this is a company that is hired to make people smile. And it's a really good premise that I hope they kind of touch on more. They don't have to make the show good, but I hope they do. At a few points, this is the thing. I think a lot of people could probably think of that premise, but there's a few points in the show where Charlie's character will say something about a dopamine rush. And there's a kind of insightful moment in in the last episode where he goes to see Satan, and Satan's playing games and eating junk food, and he's like, "You're getting quick dopamine releases, but like no long-term gains." And I'm like, "Oh man, that's really insightful." Like the premise of making someone happy is very deep, and I'm like, I really hope they do more of that. I hope they kind of touch on, and then even more, like, are they going to touch on the idea of people smiling? Because smiling is just a way to show people you're happy. And I would say like 50% of the time people smile, it's just to make other people think they're happy so they'll get off their back when they're not truly happy. So even like the job itself might be kind of like inefficient in actually making people happy, because making someone smile doesn't make them happy. And then alternatively, is it a good thing to make people happy? It kind of goes back to like, what's objectively right? Is it right to make people happy? And that's like a lot of the jokes play around with that, like at the end when the devil's happy because Charlie's getting tortured. Obviously the joke being that it's not this like super altruistic thing. So there's kind of this dark underbelly which you could either point out and like try to remedy, like in BoJack Horseman, which I mean, I don't really want to see the show become that, but it could. Or you just make fun of it and it's just this bleak show about how like, what they're doing is so paper thin. But anyways, that last comment isn't something they need to do. It's just something I would like to see played around with. Either way, I hope it continues, and it seems like there's a lot of potential there.